This episode of Mayo Clinic on Nutrition is brought to you by an educational content sponsor, National Dairy Council, a nonprofit dairy nutrition research and education organization that shares science-based information on dairy's nutritional benefits for health and wellness. Please visit usdairy.com/National Dairy Council for educational content relevant to today's topic, Unlocking the Food Matrix.
We know it's not just what's in the food, but how all those components, the vitamins, the minerals, the protein, fat, carbohydrates, bioactives, how they're all naturally packaged together that makes the difference.
This is On Nutrition, a podcast from Mayo Clinic, where we dig into the latest nutrition trends and research to help you understand what's health and what's hype. I'm Tara Schmidt, a registered dietitian with Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. This episode, the food matrix. Food is more than just the sum of its parts. Nutrients and supplements act differently than the same nutrients in whole foods. And the way those nutrients are packaged, bonded, and processed all factor into what's called a food's matrix. Sally Cummins is a registered dietitian and the Senior Vice President of Nutrition Affairs at the National Dairy Council. She and her team focus on science-backed education on the health benefits of dairy foods, often explained by the food matrix of dairy. And once you've listened to this podcast, I bet you'll be seeing the matrix of all types of foods in your everyday life. Hey, Sally. Thanks for hanging out with me today.
So happy to be here, Tara. Thanks for having me.
I know. We're getting sciencey today. So I think we just need to start with a super simple definition of food matrix, because for most, I think that might be an unfamiliar term. So
Yeah.
What are we talking about?
I've heard people kind of equate it to a symphony.
I love this analogy.
I know, right? I mean, it really puts it into context. So you kind of walk into the concert hall and you start to hear the symphony warming up and individual nutrients are playing and you hear their unique tone and timbre. And it's interesting, but it's when they come together and they play in harmony that there's something really magical that happens there. And that's the magic of the matrix. It's when all these compounds and vitamins and minerals come together to nourish our bodies in interesting ways. But the exciting thing is it's really changing how we think about how food nourishes us.
Totally.
And so probably back when we were studying nutrition as dietetic interns and students, we really had to focus on individual nutrients. So thinking about how did calcium support your body, or how did saturated fat impact your body? And now we're starting to look at all the parts of the food. So all the vitamins, minerals, proteins, carbohydrates, fatty acids, these interesting things called bioactive compounds, even the structure of the food. So if it's a solid food or a liquid or a gel, how that all works together, and how that interaction of all those components influences how we digest foods, absorb them, and how they fuel our health outcomes.
And I think you brought up a good point that you and I as dietitians have probably had to do a little bit of unlearning of the assumptions that we made about maybe, quote, bad nutrients, right? Or things that we should limit. But I think we're going to talk a lot today about how, it mostly depends on where you're getting those nutrients from, like in what package, in what symphony did it come along with, because there might be other players in the game.
Yeah, I think it's really changing the way we think about nutrition and moving from kind of this isolated look at nutrients alone to a whole food. So food first perspective, which for me is a lot more fun, right? And we always want to help people build healthy diets. And it's so much easier to do that when you take this food first approach and focus on the food itself and how you can incorporate that into lifestyles that people love and enjoy.
Yeah, and when I think about the food matrix, I think it gives, we can say, patients or members or literally anyone who eats food a little bit more opportunity to enjoy the foods that they love, like you mentioned, without the guilt, depending, right? We always have to look at the big picture. We always have to look at your pattern of eating, as I say. But I do think it gives people more, maybe some food freedom, because of what we're learning about these nutrient packages.
Mhm.
So I'm excited
Mhm.
to teach people more too. Where did the idea of the food matrix kind of come from? Is this just like nutrition science evolving? Do we know like the background of how this came to be?
Yeah. I think it's helpful to take a step back. I have the benefit of working with some amazing nutrition scientists and researchers, and they always remind me that nutrition is really a very young field. If
Mm,
you think back on it, the first vitamin was kind of discovered only about a century ago, 100 years ago, the first vitamin. And then by the 1950s, all the major vitamins had been discovered and associated with serious deficiencies. So, we think about vitamin C and the scurvy, or vitamin D and Roland rickets, or iodine and goiter. So that was kind
yep.
of the beginning of nutrition science and implementation of nutrition science, if you will. And and the beautiful thing was that it really had an impact on public health that led to the fortification or adding nutrients to food to reduce or prevent nutrient deficiencies. So milk was fortified with vitamin D to prevent rickets, and iodine was added to salt to prevent goiter. So it was really very, very helpful. And that same laser focus on nutrients, which has become to be known as the reductionist approach, it was so successful that they also applied it to associating it with chronic diseases as well. So diseases like heart disease or cancer or diabetes. And that's when saturated fat and cholesterol kind of became the causes of heart disease, or salt as the culprit for high blood
Mhm.
pressure. But then what I love about nutrition is it's a living, active field, right? And we continue to learn more. And
Ever evolving.
yeah. And so then we started to see that whole foods behave a little bit differently than
Mhm.
what we might have expected. And we were starting to see outcomes that challenged conventional thinking. Like whole milk dairy foods were part of healthy eating styles that supported health and longevity. Or cheese, despite being higher in saturated fat and sodium, didn't impact our bad cholesterol or blood pressure the way we thought it would. And so that's when we really started to explore that a little bit more. And that's when the concept of the food matrix started to emerge, when researchers recognized foods weren't just the sum of their nutrients, but it was how they were naturally bundled together, and those interactions inside the food that changed how our body absorbed them and used those nutrients. So now we're seeing the matrix really become more of core of our understanding of food-based dietary guidance and healthy eating patterns and personalized nutrition, which is so, so hot these days.
Yeah, I love it. And like I said, we don't usually get like overly into the weeds of the science on this show. We usually stay a little bit more surface level, a little bit more practical. But I think it's important to explore this, especially because when we talk about the food matrix, it's more, like you said, than surface level. We're actually kind of looking deeper than just the nutrition label, right? So I do a lot of education on nutrition labels. It's kind of like a standard thing to do sometimes with a patient. So how does the concept of the food matrix differ from the nutrient composition of a food that consumers may see at their grocery
Mhm.
store when if they pick up
Mhm.
a package?
Yeah. I think really the matrix goes way beyond the label. So the label tells us about 13 select nutrients in foods, but that's just part of the story. There's about 30 essential nutrients, and thousands of bioactives. And so clearly there's no way you can capture all of that on a food label, right? But what we know, it's not just what's in the food, but how all those components, the vitamins, the minerals, the protein, fat, carbohydrates, bioactives, how they're all naturally packaged together that makes the difference. So it helps us see beyond the label and consider that interaction of the nutrients and how they work to nourish our body.
And can we do a few definitions? Because I think people probably know about bioavailability a little bit, but we also talk in the matrix discussions, and I learned this from your colleagues about bioaccessibility.
Mhm.
Can you explain that to us?
Yeah. So, when you eat a food, your body has to break it down so nutrients can be absorbed. And so, bioaccessibility is how much of that nutrient is freed up during digestion so your body can absorb it. And then after that, your body needs to absorb it and use it. And that's where bioavailability comes in. That's the amount that actually makes it into your bloodstream and gets used for your body. One of my favorite examples is if you think about spinach. Spinach has iron, but not all of it is bioavailable because of compounds that block that absorption. But vitamin C can boost the bioavailability by helping your body absorb more of it. So another way to think about it is like a bank account. So bioaccessibility is like having your money in your account. You can see it and you can withdraw it. And bioavailability is like the money you actually spend after withdrawing it. So it's what you can use.
And we also know that processing food impacts its bioavailability. So, whether we chop or especially boil is a great example. Maybe we blend or we cook. So, can you talk about an example where its bioavailability changes?
Sure. So I think carrots are a great example. So processing. So if you think about it, if you're chopping it or boiling it or blending it, it can change. And so with carrot, chopping it doesn't reduce its bioavailability very much, but cooking it can actually make some of the nutrients like beta carotene more available because heat breaks down those cell walls.
Perfect. So again, like we're utilizing the processing. And again, that's why we always have to remind people like processing food does not equal bad, right? Like in this case, the quote processing is cooking the carrot, but we just improved the amount of vitamins that the body is now able to utilize.
Right. I think that's something, it could probably be a whole nother conversation and podcast, right? But kind of diving into processing a little bit more and
Yeah.
understanding how it helps keep our food safe, make it more accessible, and just the positive roles that food processing can play as well.
Yeah, food safety is a great example.
Mhm.
Pasteurizing milk, like absolutely critical.
Right. It's a great example about a positive role of food processing.
And speaking of milk, why do you feel like dairy is at kind of the forefront of this research? We have, I think, food matrices within all of our food groups. You're most familiar with dairy, but what do you feel like makes dairy so unique in this kind of topic?
So I get really excited about this. This is where the
As you
nutrition
should.
nerd comes out, right? But so we think about dairy foods, right? Sometimes we might say dairy foods. Sometimes we might talk about milk, cheese, and yogurt, like different types of dairy foods. But dairy foods in general are wonderfully complex and unique, especially like so we look deeper than protein, fat, carbohydrates, and vitamins and minerals. Like for me, the real aha came when I learned that milk fat is the most complex of all naturally occurring fats with over 400 different types of fatty acids,
Oh my gosh.
making it especially intriguing to nutrition researchers and a topic of ongoing scientific exploration. Also, it's always surprising for me when we talk about fatty acids. I think it's common for a lot of people to think about dairy foods and saturated fat. But the reality of it is, within those 400 different types of fatty acids, 29% are monounsaturated. In fact, more than 20% of it is oleic acid, and that's the same fatty acid, the heart healthy fatty acid found in olive oil. So it's really these unique fats and short chain fatty acid, medium chain fatty acid, odd branch chains, trans fatty acids that are contained within something we call the milk fat globular membrane. And that's kind of where a lot of the magic happens. It's really much more complex and interesting than just thinking of it as protein or fat or vitamins and minerals. And that's when we started to see some interesting and maybe unexpected benefits.
Wow. So there are actually more healthy fats in dairy than we may have thought. But does knowing the science then drive you nuts when people make these blanket statements about individual foods or nutrients? Like, do you just want to scream, it's more complicated than that?
I know. I know. I feel like everybody just wants a very simple answer. And probably
Yeah.
you and I have both encountered people just saying, tell me what to eat. And we probably can do that, right? While it's complex, while foods are complex and unique, nutrition doesn't have to be complicated. And so there is a gray area, and helping people understand that and choose foods that they enjoy, and that they can build healthy eating patterns with. We all know, we've heard the statement before, it's only healthy if you eat it. And so it's that aspect of helping people embrace foods they enjoy and build them into healthy eating patterns.
Yes, I love it. Food labels give a lot of information, but even the most detailed labels aren't able to give the whole picture. If nutrients are the instruments in a symphony, the food matrix is the sound of them all coming together to play a piece of music. One thing to think about when considering a food matrix is the concept of bioavailability versus bioaccessibility. Bioavailability is the total amount of nutrients that can theoretically be absorbed, and bioaccessibility is what actually gets absorbed. The food matrix affects this. So does processing. Cooking certain vegetables, like carrots, for example, can increase the amount of vitamins and minerals you absorb when eating them. And certain combinations of nutrients increase the bioavailability of others, like how vitamin C can increase the absorption of iron. If this all sounds a little confusing, just remember, choosing what to eat doesn't have to be complicated. Consuming the beautiful matrices of whole foods and enjoying everything in moderation will help create a healthy eating pattern that you can actually stick with. Now, let's get a little deeper into Sally's bread and butter and dish about dairy. Let's talk more about the nutrients kind of available in dairy products. So you've mentioned in a simplified form, of course, which it's more than this, but we've got protein, we've got vitamin D, we've got calcium, we've got phosphorus, we've got these fatty acids. Does it depend on the product, or are the nutrients available different depending on how it's been processed?
So every dairy food begins with milk. Milk is the foundational ingredient of dairy foods. And so, um, an 8-ounce cup of milk provides 13 essential nutrients like protein and key nutrients people aren't consuming enough of, like potassium, calcium, vitamin D. So I like to think of it as protein plus, because yes, it provides protein, but so much more. And then it's how that milk is transformed into products like cheese or yogurt or kefir that can impact its nutrient profile. And sometimes those are concentrated. So if you think about like Greek or Icelandic yogurt that are really thick, and so you tend to have more protein in a Greek or Icelandic yogurt than you might have in milk. And then sometimes some of the other nutrients might fall off as well. So it is that transformation from milk to cheese or yogurt that impacts the nutrient profile.
So how does fermentation with something like yogurt or kefir expand or change the dairy matrix?
Yeah. So with fermentation, it's usually when you're adding live and active cultures. So you might see that like on your yogurt container containing live and active cultures, and that transforms the milk into the yogurt or the kefir, and that adds probiotics and it changes the matrix. Oftentimes, it actually improves digestibility and nutrient absorption. So that's why you also see sometimes when people say they have issues with lactose intolerance, that they might be able to tolerate yogurt or hard cheeses better than liquid milk. And part of that is because those live and active cultures can break down that lactose and it can help them tolerate it and enjoy it more.
And when we talk about kind of necessary processing, so things like pasteurization or homogenization when it comes to dairy food specifically, do we now still get to count those foods as, quote, whole foods, right? So you and I both, I think, kind of preach a whole food diet or kind of plant forward in most cases, but make sure you're getting essential nutrients from a wide variety, blah, blah, blah. Do we still get to call these things whole foods even if they've been processed?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. And again, it goes back to what we talked about of kind of that spectrum of processing and the different roles that processing play. And so we also know that a lot of the science and research that's been done on whether it's cheese or yogurt or pasteurized or homogenized milk, those health benefits and outcomes have been seen with foods that are in the marketplace. And so we know that if you go to the grocery store, it's going to be pasteurized milk. It's going to be homogenized milk. And so I think certainly we're seeing that it's the foods that are in our marketplace that are having the positive impact on health.
Yeah, and I think there's such a difference between a gallon of milk that has, again, appropriately been pasteurized and an ultra-processed food in which you have absolutely no idea where it started from, or like you couldn't name the first 15 ingredients. That's not always the case. But I think there's a pretty big difference between like this food was processed to help make nutrients more bioavailable, to make sure that nutrients that pregnant women or children may be lacking in have in their diet, fortification, for example, versus a snack food that's like neon green. That's not necessarily natural, we could say.
And I think we also probably came up on the 80-20 principle too, right?
Yeah.
So 80% of the time you really are striving to do your best and build those healthy diets. And then there's that 20% of time that you have a little bit more leeway to enjoy some of the fun foods.
Does the food matrix point to any benefits of whole fat dairy?
Yeah. What is exciting is how clear and consistent the science is on this topic. So there's been more than 30 years of research from around the world that shows that whole milk and other full fat dairy foods offer a health advantage. And so that's an aha. This is something that we've been thinking that we need to probably limit. But really the science is clear that there's a clear role and benefits for full fat dairy foods. And so they demonstrate that dairy foods at all fat levels, so from fat-free all the way to whole milk, provide essential nutrients that support bone health, healthy growth in children, lower the risk of heart disease and type 2 diabetes. So just kind of double downing on the fact that it goes well beyond a single nutrient. There's nutrient-dense whole foods that support balance, flexibility, and well-being at every age.
Well, and I like that you even just mentioned, Sally, skim milk too, because I wanted to be clear that we're not now pushing whole fat dairy on people if they prefer or for whatever reason consuming low fat or fat free. So I'll just give an example. My mom drinks skim milk. She loves skim milk. That's what we were brought up on. Like, that's her preference. I don't have to convince her to drink whole milk, right? Like, we're cool with you drinking skim milk, Mom.
Right. When you look at it, so, the recommendations are for adults to get about 3 servings of dairy foods a day. But the reality of it is we're falling low on that. We're only getting about half of it, 1.5. And so we have a gap to fill. And so if we can look at ways to take a step back and see how do people like to consume their dairy foods.
Yes.
And then find some flexibility in that to allow them to build those healthy diets the way they like and enjoy. And so it is a term that's referred to as fat flexibility. So if your mom loves skim milk and she's consuming 3 servings of skim milk a day,
100%.
or, more power to her, like keep at it. But if she wasn't hitting those 3 servings a day, you could take a step back and explore why. Is it from a taste perspective, or is it from lactose intolerance perspective? And then finding those routes to help her build that diet. So opposite of your mom, I always use the example of my husband, who really likes to start his day with a latte in the morning, like coffee and milk in the morning. And he likes whole milk. He likes that creamy texture of the whole milk. And it's part of like his morning ritual. But throughout the course of the day, we use a reduced fat Greek yogurt, or sometimes fat-free yogurt, whichever one we kind of grab. And we use that and mix it with fruit or oatmeal. Sometimes, use it for dips. And so there's a lot of flexibility. There's a lot of options in the dairy case to help people build those healthy diets.
Yeah. My mom might be purposefully having skim milk and enjoying it because she wants to, like, quote, save room for more cheese in her diet, right? So we can take anyone's preferences and their health concerns. And I always use example of my patients in cardiac rehab. We're like, hi, Terry, you're not going to make me drink skim milk, are you? I grew up on a dairy farm and I really want to drink whole. And I'm like, it's okay, Mr. Smith. Like, I promise you that you can drink whole milk. And we're also going to talk about the other sources of saturated fat in your diet.
Right.
And we're going to talk about how you're preparing food. And we're going to talk about how often you even drink skim milk. Maybe it's just a latte in the morning or whole milk, etc. So we can be flexible. Dietitians are flexible, you guys. We're cool. We can make it work, I promise. Milk contains 13 essential nutrients that nourish our bodies, and the food matrix of different dairy products can change the balance of those nutrients. Greek yogurt has more protein than milk, and fermented drinks like kefir have lower amounts of lactose. So if you're looking for more or less of a nutrient, maybe because of lactose intolerance, it's still possible to consume dairy if you're aware of the differing food matrices. Next, we're going to talk about the state of food and go a bit further into how processing affects various types of food matrices, even the types of processing you probably don't think of as processing. Do you have anything to say about chewing? Is this a relevant thing?
With chewing, I think people sometimes forget that digestion starts in the mouth. That's where
salivary amylase, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of the first step. So we're talking about bioaccessibility and bioavailability. So that's that very first step where you're starting to break down the matrix a little bit, so the food can go through that process within your body.
And also in the same respect, I think we've probably both educated people on the state of the food. Like, let's talk about eating an apple versus eating applesauce versus drinking apple juice. Is the difference, let's say, in the rise of blood sugar, A versus B versus C, is that also like part of this food matrix topic that we're talking about?
Yeah, it certainly can be. Researchers have found that how a food is prepared can change how your body responds to it. So, to your point about apples, in one study, people ate the same amount of carbohydrates from apples in three forms. So they had whole apples, they had apples that were blended into a puree, and they had a fiber-free apple juice. And so their blood sugar went up about the same in all cases. But interestingly, their insulin, that hormone that helps manage your blood sugar, it spiked higher after the juice and the pureed compared to the whole apples. So it kind of is telling us that the natural fiber structure in fruit is broken down, like in that juice or puree. Your body processes that sugar differently.
Okay, can we just say that I did not know you had an apple example when I asked you that question? So I feel like we're on the same wavelength, and I love it.
We are caught in the matrix.
Yeah. And when we're cooking, do you ever talk to people about prioritizing combinations of food to kind of maximize the reactions? Like, I know I've definitely done it in someone who has iron deficiency or is at risk of iron deficiency but doesn't eat red meat. I'm like, okay,
Right.
so now you have to select non-heme iron sources. You're more likely to have non-heme iron, and I want you to pair that with a vitamin C. Okay, that could be a spinach salad with strawberries. It's just like an example that I have in my head. Do you have any other examples of these matrices that really do improve health outcomes?
Yeah, I know this is also one of those areas of nutrition that I get
We're so
really
nerdy,
excited
right?
about. I know. And some people call it like synergies, like nutrient pairings or synergies. And that's also like when we talk about there's food groups for a reason. And when it's really important to have a plate that has different colors and textures because you're getting different nutrients from those different colors and textures and food groups. And so I love the example that you had of pairing iron with vitamin C. So that's like, I always think about strawberries on a spinach salad or lentils and bell peppers together. But it goes beyond that. We've learned that fats can help release fat-soluble vitamins. So if you think about maybe putting avocado on your kale salad, so you're getting vitamin K from your kale, and that fat from the avocado is helping with that. Or sauteing your carrots in an olive oil, like that's a good pairing and synergy. And then lycopene, which is in tomatoes. It's like one of those really, we've been talking about bioactives and those health components. So lycopene is a really important component in tomatoes, and that's also absorbed better with fat. So maybe if you're making tomato sauce and you put a little olive oil in it, or there's the reason why salsa and guacamole are perfect pairs, because it's the fat from that avocado paired with the lycopene in the salsa is really helpful.
And again, these are not rules. It's not like you're not going to get the benefits of a spinach salad if you don't have avocado or strawberries or peppers on it. But we're just geeking out and like sharing kind of the magic that nutrition can be. So this is not about rules. This is not about you're not going to get any benefits if you don't do it this way. This is more about just like, hey, like, look how cool food science is. Like, this is really meaningful.
Right. And that's what I always think about. Like, we don't need to make nutrition or healthy eating complicated, right? But there are some ways that you can plus things up.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sally, you and your team are absolutely amazing. You're so smart. I've learned so much since knowing you and working with you. So I want to just thank you again for your time and bringing us all of your knowledge today about this super cool, although science-y topic. I love it.
Oh, thank you so much for having us. I love geeking out on nutrition with you anytime, Kara.
Wherever there's food, there are food matrices that inform how our bodies break down, digest, and absorb their nutrients. The food matrix is affected by how something is prepared, processed, cooked, fermented, and even how it's paired with other foods. It can be a fun game to come up with different ways to synergize nutrient absorption, like pairing lentils with red peppers to better absorb the iron, or adding olive oil to tomatoes to absorb more lycopene. But rest assured, you don't need a chemistry degree to have a healthy eating pattern. Invisible but essential, the food matrix works behind the scenes, helping us get the most from each bite. That's all for this episode, but if you have a follow-up question, leave us a voicemail at 507-538-6272, and we'll answer it in a future episode. For more On Nutrition episodes and resources, check us out online at mayoclinic.org/onnutrition. And if you found this show helpful, please subscribe and make sure to rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. It really helps others find our show. Thanks for listening. And until next time, eat well and be well.
This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as medical or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified healthcare provider for any medical questions. The appearance of any guest does not imply an endorsement of them, their employer, or any entity they represent. The views and opinions are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of Mayo Clinic. Reference to any product, service, or entity does not constitute an endorsement of or recommendation by Mayo Clinic.